Welcome to a dialogue on accountability in the digital age. A dialogue with representatives of a global, multi-stakeholder community.
And I'm your host, Frits Bussemaker, and today I'm talking with Jennifer Woodard. Jennifer, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Fritz.
Allow me to introduce Jennifer. You are a global communications thought leader on AI and counterterrorism, advisory board member of the Global Legal Tech Hub, co-founder of I4ADA, and founding partner of Insight Intelligence. Now, you used to work with the European Commission. You come from San Francisco, live in Barcelona, and today you spread the news. You have been nominated on the expert board of CERIS, the Community for European Research and Innovation for Security. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
So the topic of today is AI, public safety, counterterrorism. Now, so that means AI can go both ways. We're going to have look at two sides of the coin: how AI is a threat and how AI is an opportunity. What's it predominantly in your mind, a threat or an opportunity?
I think it's an opportunity, definitely. So AI threats are definitely emerging, and AI will have to be employed to basically mitigate those threats. But it's definitely an opportunity for the current threats that we have. So everything from, we work in the online space, everything from terrorism, radicalization, disinformation, other types of crime, human trafficking, child exploitation. All of those things can be mitigated using AI tools.
Okay. And you are a founding partner. I mean, I want to go into give you a little bit of more context for the people who do not know you yet.
Sure.
Of Dialectica, which is an NGO, I understand.
Yes, it is.
Can you explain me a little bit what your purpose is?
Yes, so we established I4ADA because in working in the security research field, we understood that there wasn't this perfect melange or perfect triangulation of all of the stakeholders that should be involved in order to fully kind of capitalize on the use of technologies and the ethical use of technologies in security. So what we wanted to do was bring together all of the stakeholders: law enforcement agencies, researchers, AI innovators and developers, and any sort of public entities as well, in order to understand not only the opportunities of the use of emerging technologies for the defeat of crime and terrorism, but also what are the ethical implications. So obviously there are a lot of ethical implications that some people might overblow them at times, and some people might not even be aware that there are any. So bringing all of those stakeholders together was basically the goal.
Okay. Who were missing in that discussion? I can assume everybody wants to be there, but who do you feel you needed to bring into that discussion?
I mean, there's always been, actually speaking from our experience, so we're speaking from the point of view of being both researchers and AI developers, we come into contact a lot with law enforcement agencies, but it's not something that naturally happens. It happens in the course of kind of research projects or collaborations. So they are definitely missing, I guess, as kind of at a larger scale, right? And civil society and just kind of citizens are missing from the conversation. There are definitely civil society organizations that are trying to work on this, but they are working on it from the point of view of AI being kind of a scary thing, and the ethical and privacy dimension of things. So also kind of bringing them into the conversation, understanding what their concerns are, and then kind of related to that is basically the public at large. So the public tends to hear a lot about, oh, you know, AI is used for nefarious purposes by the police. Letting them know that there are actually some really good benefits from using AI for policing and security was also important.
Okay, because I want to touch on your mission is to support the trust and transparency in AI for the security sector.
Correct.
To what extent is that? I mean, it sounds like a contradiction when you deal with security. I mean, is that a contradiction or not? Because I mean, I'm the first thing, and now I'm being, you could say, somebody from the general public. If you're going to make very transparent how your technology works, then the bad guys can actually abuse that.
Yes, that's always a risk. It depends on what level of transparency you have, but I think trust and transparency is the idea behind it is that the public understand that the tools that are being used have been created in a certain way that is striving towards fairness, right? So if you're using an analysis tool that is driven by AI, that it was actually vetted for all of the different things that, let's say, the European Union looks for in their tools for AI. So we're talking about, robustness and transparency, explainability, lack of bias. Obviously, all of these things are not perfect. And that's kind of one of the reasons why the AI Act was introduced, not just for security, but in general. But that is the ultimate goal, that we understand that, for instance, a machine is taking a decision for these reasons. This is the way it was designed. This is the way the data that was fed into the machine was annotated and qualified and vetted, that the algorithms at least strive to lack bias or completely debiased, which is sometimes a little bit more difficult when we're talking about larger AI models. But that is actually the goal. And also when we think about trust, it's in transparency, it's also a little bit more lofty. It's just basically telling people what we're doing, right? That AI innovators are doing these things, that police are doing these things, without going into specific details. Obviously, when things are highly sensitive, that doesn't make a lot of sense. It is counterproductive, as you said, but that's the goal.
Okay. Now, you just mentioned, like we all know, AI making decisions. What's then your take on accountability?
Yes, there has to be accountability. That's actually one of the main pillars of ethical AI development. That's definitely something that needs to be taken into consideration always. So there's accountability. There's always the debate around who is actually accountable. For instance, is it the person that is doing the research, the person, you can go way back into the process. Like, was it the person that annotated the data, or was it the person that chose the data set? Was it the person that developed this technology, or is it the actual, let's say, security agency that's using it? So these are all kind of philosophical questions. And I think actually, like I mentioned before, that these are things that a lot of people have been discussing in the context of the introduction of the AI Act. When people talk about it, at first people are like, oh, well, this is going to stifle the ability to innovate. But actually, that's not the case. This is giving kind of the, let's say, the guardrails for how to do this in the right way.
Okay. So how then in your opinion, can we turn the philosophical questions into more concrete questions? Because at the end of the day, we are already using technology, so it should not, we should go beyond the philosophical discussion.
Yeah, I think one thing is to really ground it in use cases. There was a lot of talk at the beginning of this, and still now, about like, what is the definition of AI, and what is high risk AI, and what trade-offs need to be made. And I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about the fact that it seems like AI has been painted with this very broad brush, right? That everything falls under the umbrella of AI, and the use cases haven't been fully explored. So the idea is not that AI is what we need to kind of police. We need to police the actual use cases. So you could have the same technology doing two different things in the area of security, and one of those things is maybe not acceptable, and the other thing is absolutely necessary for things like counterterrorism, or for keeping children safe, or whatever. So we really need to ground it in the use cases. And then when we look at these use cases, take a careful look at how these methods are actually being developed, how they're working, how they're being deployed, and also educating. That was kind of one of getting back to the triangulation, or the perfect combination of stakeholders, educating the people who will be using that. Because in some cases, I've seen, this is more in the past and more in the US, cases of AI tools being deployed by police officers that really don't understand how the decisions that they're taking aren't necessarily they shouldn't be autonomous. They should never be autonomous decisions. They should be a human in the loop decision. AI should be helping them take decisions, maybe, but they shouldn't be trusting it completely, because AI is not perfect. So these types of conversations, I think.
Great. You actually give us a great insight in how we could start to deal with accountability in a digital age, look at the use cases and focus on that, and not on the conceptual side.
Right.
That's a good insight to share with the audience. Now, you have a global perspective. Do you see differences in different regions in the world, how we deal with this?
Yeah, I see different maybe visions.
Yeah.
And when I've seen it crystallize has been
Yep.
with the introduction of the AI Act, because then everybody starts talking about what the differences are between the European vision versus the American vision versus the Asian vision. One thing that, in speaking with Asian colleagues, for instance, have told me is that, okay, well, you guys are regulating from a place of fear, and we regulate from a place of optimism. So we believe that AI is going to help us accomplish a lot of things, and you all are fearful of what can be accomplished with AI. So I'm not saying that I agree with that. I actually don't. But there is definitely a cultural difference, and I think the US is also a little bit more moving in the direction of not so much looking more at the benefits versus the potential pitfalls, although they just introduced some new legislation this week, I think, related to AI. It's nothing like our AI Act here in Europe, but I think it does there are cultural differences for sure. In Asia, obviously, they've been using AI technologies for everyday things before other regions have. So maybe they're more comfortable with kind of AI creeping into their everyday lives, and that makes them have a different vision of it. So I think that there are definitely cultural differences.
Okay, and can they live side by side in the globe as far as you're concerned? Or is it something we need to look at how we can?
I think they should. Actually, I was speaking at a conference earlier this year with, I think he's the head of innovation for South Korea.
Mhm.
And he was also talking about this vision that they have of, yes, regulation, but from, from the potential versus the dangers and pitfalls, and definitely with an ethical focus. And we talked about the fact that none of this can really work if we don't work together. So we need to come together on what our common values are. Obviously, we have lots of differences between regions, but AI is global because the world is global and the internet is global. So we need to find ways, I think, at the very top level to have policymakers prioritize working together to see how we can do this.
Okay, that brings up, a couple of questions and thoughts I have. I'd like to ask your opinion on that.
Sure.
One of the big issues with fast developing technology is that the legal and regulatory framework cannot keep up with that. So it creates a gap. That's an accountability gap.
Yes.
So when we pursue a global discussion, you're going to lag policy development because of how fast technology is going. So how do we deal with that situation then?
We need to become faster in policy development. I think, to be perfectly honest, that is the case, and that's been something that's come up a lot here, because when the AI Act, for instance, it's what I know the most about. When it was being developed, people were already saying, but why are we talking about this specific thing when this specific thing has been on the market for the past 10 years, right? So I think that's really the only way, and the only way to do that is to kind of push on our policymakers to make sure that they understand something that's important to the public. I think one thing that the European Parliament has said many times is, like, the AI Act didn't kind of just emerge didn't emerge out of nowhere. It emerged organically from a public, preoccupation or worry or concern about what's happening with AI. So if we have the ability to push policymakers to start thinking about these things, and it's been proven that we do, then we need to actually push them towards moving faster on this, because otherwise, as you mentioned, the policies will become obsolete as the technology kind of just shoots forward.
Yeah. So one of the solutions I hear you saying between the lines is we need to educate policymakers to make them understand we need to move faster.
Yes.
To what extent is this also a 21st century issue which requires 21st century solutions? So can you envision additional and different solutions for governance next to policy development?
I don't know. I think that maybe I don't envision a different solution because I think it's hard to change the way policies are made. But I do think that there could be more of a, private collaboration with policymakers, for instance, or more of just bringing different stakeholders or some sort of a framework that would get them kind of, like you said, more knowledge, basically more knowledge in terms of this. One thing that I saw, getting back to kind of cultural issues, is okay, here in Europe, policymakers are policymakers. And what I've heard in Asia is that, for instance, in some larger countries, a lot of the policymakers are actually engineers or scientists or people that are super close to the technology. So in their expertise, they have the ability to see both sides of things. And that's not necessarily the case here. So maybe it is a larger engagement with the scientific community, with the development community, with the general public in terms of what their concerns are. And perhaps that might be the way, but there doesn't exist, as far as I know, a framework for that right now. It's kind of in a silo.
Okay, hey, good insights. In your opinion, what are the biggest threats for accountability today?
For accountability, I think, to be perfectly honest, AI development in terms of the methods that we're using right now, not everything is super explainable. Not everything, you can't take a ton of time to explain every thing that's happening in a model that has hundreds of millions of parameters in it. That's really not something that you can do. And that ties into accountability, right? Because if you want to be accountable, you have to be able to explain also the way things are done, the way decisions are made. If problems occur, which is one of the main focuses of why accountability is important, you need to be able to rectify those problems. So I think that the very nature of the way AI models are being built is perhaps the biggest kind of obstacle to accountability. I don't think it is the reluctance to be, or the resistance to be accountable, because I think that most of us we want to be accountable, we want to be responsible for what we're doing. I don't think that there are the users, like let's say the stakeholders that are deploying these types of technologies, I don't think that they are looking for problems, and they want to get everything right too, but it is a challenge.
Okay, hey, thanks for that, Jennifer. Now, given your background, given your role, I'm also assuming you work with UNICRI, the UN agency for crime prevention.
Yes.
And how do they take AI on board?
UNICRI, I think, well, UNICRI is a research institute focused on crime and part of the UN. And what they have been doing, which has been, in my opinion, very pioneering, is looking at all the different ways that AI can be used for certain sectors of, or let's say, use cases of crime, particularly in the area of terrorism, and what the kind of ethical slash I guess human rights, fundamental rights implications might be of that. So with their working groups, they have been focusing on things like social network analysis. We were on a panel a couple of months ago about this. So network analysis, for instance, is something that's really important for understanding things like the spread of disinformation, the way terrorist groups operate online, or the way they communicate. Very, very powerful, but at the same time has some implications in terms of ethics and privacy, because obviously you're looking at users. And while on the one hand we have it's public data, because everything on the internet that you publish is quote unquote public data, it's actually not actually public data. So that's an example of some of the areas that I've been looking at with them and the research that they're doing, but they're doing a really great job at pushing this forward. I also know that they are currently focused on looking at threats in the metaverse as well, particularly around the protection of children.
Okay, can you give examples of what kind of threats? I mean, the metaverse, it's I think we've just started to see its use on a global scale. So what are emerging threats the metaverse could have, which we need to think about?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, the metaverse is, we're just starting to see
Yeah.
its actual applicability in every single part of our lives. So I think that we should consider the metaverse the way we considered the internet at the beginning, right? So when we had the internet back in the early 90s, everybody was very excited about it being a space for entertainment, for commerce, for all of the different things that we now know and love it for, right? But it also became a space for a lot of nefarious activity, which you're very well aware of. So it can be all of that, but exponentially worse. So what we envision right now is a space where something like toxic behavior can become incredibly more toxic. So if you are, for instance, being victimized by someone, currently you can be victimized by someone's texts or messages. Imagine that being an avatar that can actually attack you in person. There are lots of other different things that we can imagine. For instance, and actually this has already been something that's been studied. The ability to train people for terrorist attacks or to radicalize someone in person. Like, so for instance, instead of sending them tweets and messages online, you could also say, okay, well, we'll create a hologram or an avatar of some, terrorist, an Osama bin Laden, and revive that person and have him radicalizing people. These types of situations that make everything that we are already dealing with, that's already still hard to deal with, that much harder, right? And then on the technical side, it's not just what we're dealing with now. It's a completely different area because we're talking about other types of data, behavioral data that'll be coming in through these types of scenarios. It's not just, so now you might be scanning the internet looking for terrorist related content, right? In this case, you're going to be in a situation where you have not just tweets or messages to analyze. You're going to have to analyze all sorts of different types of multimedia data, and nobody really knows what that's going to look like. Another part of that is the fact that nobody knows who was going to own these spaces, right? So same with the internet. Nobody really, it didn't belong to anybody. It still kind of doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs to some major players, you could say. And in the metaverse, obviously Meta the company has staked out its place, but Meta won't be the only ones. So maybe Meta will cooperate with security agencies to make sure that these things don't happen. But what if there's another company that comes online that creates a space that's highly popular and all of these things are happening? It'll be happening maybe in a vacuum. So I think the bottom line is that the threats that we already face on the regular internet already are too much for what we have. So we need to be thinking about what we'll do, even though the space has not been defined.
Yeah, that's my take on listening to your prediction of what's going to happen. We really need much more education and make people realize, policymakers, hey, you've just come to understand what the current internet is doing. Look what's going to come very soon our way, and you really need to prepare for this.
Right. Even if you don't know, like, even if we don't have all the answers, because people will ask all the time, well, what are you actually going to be analyzing? What's actually, where the space? We don't know that. We need to build up groups who are already thinking about potential risks and also identify the risks that are already emerging. So the metaverse is not new. There are metaverse spaces, and there are metaverse spaces where bad things are happening now. So we can start there.
Yeah. Okay. Now, last couple of questions, Jennifer. What's the low-hanging fruit in this case?
In the metaverse, or in
general about AI? Well, you can answer both. In general, metaverse. What's the low-hanging fruit? What should we be doing?
I think the low-hanging fruit is AI adoption. I mean, that is very broad, but one of the things that we talk a lot about is the fact that, okay, AI is being used, for instance, if you talk about online spaces, AI is being used by large companies to do their own content moderation. So Facebook has their massive AI teams. They have AI researchers who are working on these types of things. But clearly the problem is not solved there, and it's not solved on many other platforms. So AI adoption in general by security agencies, in order to be able to kind of get these threats understood and mitigated without the help of these large companies would be something that I would recommend. There isn't a lot of massive AI adoption in this sense. There may be many reasons why. It could be that people don't trust it. People are afraid of accountability issues. People don't want to engage maybe with the private sector, because that's another thing. So a lot of these solutions are being developed by the private sector. Maybe that's not something that security agencies are comfortable doing. But I do think that that would be just trying to use AI for mitigating these types of threats, because it's not currently happening as much as it could.
Got that. Okay, so trust each other more to collaboratively work on the solutions which are needed for this new world.
Exactly.
Last question. Describe your ideal world.
My ideal world in this context,
Yes,
would be it would put me out of business, but it would be a world without online harms and toxicity, and without online terrorism, actually without any kind of terrorism. But I think if that can't be achieved, my ideal world would be a world in which AI is employed for the good of all of us, for basically ridding the internet of these types of things.
okay.
And that everybody can understand and benefit from it, and that there wouldn't be any sort of any sort of a trade-off when it comes to accountability and ethics, that we would get it right all the time. But that's a hard thing to do. It's what we'll strive for, but it's a hard thing to do.
Well, it's something we can do together. And I think once we start to collaborate on a global scale together, we will get there eventually. We have to.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
indeed.
Okay. Hey, Jennifer, my pleasure and honor to talk to you for sharing your insights on possible ways to deal with accountability in the digital age.
Thank you so
Wish you
much.
well, and thank you.
Thank you very much.